We're going to go into one of the great characters in history right now. I'm going to share with you some things you maybe haven't heard before. You know, one of the interesting things I didn't cover in this particular module on George Washington was the unnecessary death that happened. You know, back then, science, well, it wasn't what it is today. And so they would leech, they would bleed you. They thought that, well, you've got bad humors, they call it, like, you know, toxins. And so they would, you know, try to bleed out the toxins, and actually they'd leach you out. And it's disgusting, really. And they would try to make you better by that process. What an unfortunate way to have to go. But I'll tell you something else, man. I'm always frustrated when I find out something that I grew up with and been doing all these years is getting exposed as unhealthy. Let me just throw this out there before I get into Washington. So my kids are saying to me, Dad, you're drinking out of plastic bottles. You're getting all the toxins, all the poisons, all the phyto whatevers, because the gases are coming out. So all my kids have got glass. They're all walking around with glass bottles because they don't want to drink plastic. Well, then I'm taking a look at what's in the water. You got like the abortion pill out there, the pharmaceutical, the COVID thing, and all that stuff goes out there. And so, in order to kill all the garbage that's in the water, like your local whatever plant shocks it with like chlorine or kills it off, then what are you drinking? And so, if everything's taken out, you hope all the garbage is out. Look, I'm making a point here. Hang on a second. Then where do the minerals go back in? So if you're cleaning it all out, you hope it's cleaning out all the garbage, but then you're saying, well, what you're drinking lifeless water. I mean, water actually has the minerals in the water is why you want to get the minerals in the water. So that's the only reason why I started listening to my staff, looked at this thing, lancewallnau.com/water. It's the Century H2O system. Makes up for the minerals. It puts it back into the water while it takes out. I said, what do you guys remove? They remove the chlorine, the chloramines, and the pharmaceuticals, the ammonia, the silica, and then it adds pH, that pH that makes your water healthier rather than acidic. Anyway, I'm just telling you, we use it here in the studio, and I'm finding out more and more about the value of this all the time. Go to lancewallnau.com/water. And use code Lance, and I'll get like a 10% boom off of it. Just check it out. You deserve to be able to drink water that isn't taking something out of you, but putting something into you that you want. lancewallnau.com/water. Use the code Lance, and you get 10% off. And now let's talk about George. Well, in our pantheon of great Americans, of course, we just talked about Lincoln. I got so much more we could have talked about regarding Lincoln, but I wanted you to catch the idea that providence serves up these leaders. And you ever think about this? Your prayers may not make you a central figure in history, but when you get to the other side, you'll find out when it's all like the tapestry's turned around and you see all the weaving that went into creating that history. Your intercession, your prayers, your obedience, your humble faithfulness to do what you're called to do feeds into the process. I believe that God serves up in our history, I can certainly see that in the United States, a Washington for what we call a crucible. That's what in fourth turning language is the cycle of every 80 years or so, or 70 years, where we hit a moment, a defining moment of national crises. And at that moment, the collective temperament and morality of the people serves up in desperation a hero who kind of like gets the Hail Mary ball thrown to them, and Providence puts it in their hands, and they, against all the odds, have to score a touchdown. That's perhaps a mixing of metaphors here, but it's what it is. I want you to catch this, that America's first great awakening served up with George Whitefield and Edwards and Mathis and the various others, Thomas Cotton and various other known and lesser famous circuit riders. They prepared the soil of America so that the intercession and the piety of the country was sufficiently healthy so that the prayers of the saints could produce a new nation. And Washington was the critical asset that we look at as the one who, more than anyone else, enabled the United States to exist. And I went to Valley Forge Military Academy. My dad is a military guy from the Second World War. He felt that a military education, he's a Southerner, he felt that a military education is what a young man needs. Get him away from, well, my mother and girls were two things he would say. Your mother interferes with discipline. And so these Southern Virginians, which my dad was a Virginian, they really have a belief in military as an aspiration, a place where character is formed, an opportunity allows you on your merit to be able to rise. And I need to give you this little piece. At Valley Forge, where I was, it was freezing cold during the winter. And Washington was tested. His soldiers were tested. In fact, as much as 30 to 40% of his troops at any point were dying, not from combat, but from disease. And common among that was the various plagues that, like smallpox, that would afflict the troops in the camps. Washington could have easily been taken out, but the hand of providence, catch this, his brother, his older brother, had contracted smallpox and tuberculosis. And so it's actually his half-brother Lawrence. And so George, when he was young, accompanied his brother to take him to Barbados, take you down to a Southern Caribbean climate, someplace where you could breathe and dry out and maybe strengthen your lungs. And while he was there in Barbados, Washington himself contracted smallpox. He got it bad, but he survived. Why is that interesting? Well, because during the Revolutionary War, when 1/3 of his army died from smallpox, Washington was immune. He visited the troops. He visited them while they were sick. He was among them and never caught it. You know why? He got it when he was young, trying to take care of his brother. Now, the hand of providence is interesting. In your life, you could see moments that look to you like, that's a terrible, turn in the road. That's a bad deck of cards. But then if you play the full deck out, you'll find out later on, the benefit of what happened to you here paid off there. That's where providence comes in. He also, by the way, because of that, he ordered mass inoculations for all of his troops because he believed that they needed that in order to survive. Now, he had a love that he lost. These are the interesting things you don't know about these guys. I'm trying to give you some information you don't normally hear. The love that he lost. He had a real crush on a girl he wanted to marry. And the girl really liked him. But in Virginia society, you kind of had to have a certain level of social status in order to claim the attentions of someone's daughter at their level of social status. And so Washington's best friend was a couple of levels above him in prestige, aristocracy, and finance and standing. And the families got together and he walked off with Washington's girl. You say, so what? Stop and think about that. I'm talking about the things that formed him providentially into the person that he ended up being. Washington fell in love with Sally Fairfax, ended up marrying his best friend, George William Fairfax. She was elegant, witty, and as I said, unattainable. But they had a great correspondence. She loved talking to him, and it was kind of like a special relationship, like a soulmate. And she could tell him things that she knew he'd understand, other people couldn't get. And Washington knew this was an infatuation. This was an affair in correspondence, and he cut it off. He just knew it ain't going to end well. But think about that in a day and an age where there's so many, scandals all around. Washington, he has this characteristic of he wants to be a gentleman and a great man. And he makes this his goal. He really aspires to this. There's this emotional restraint that would break off all correspondence to master his emotions is an act that mirrors his political restraint and his military restraint over and over. He could be a severe disciplinarian, but he knew how to restrain himself from overuse of power because he had a remarkable self-control. During his early life in the frontiers, this guy really was like a man's man. Out in the wilderness, hunting, living in the wild. And he worked as a surveyor in Virginia. He was trained, but he went out west, and he was working basically to clear territory. And during the French and Indian War at the Battle of Monongahela, Washington rode into heavy fire, and 2 horses were shot out from under him, and 4 bullets tore through his coat, yet he was untouched. And that was during the French and Indian War. And but to have horses shot out from under you and to come back and see holes through your coat gives you this sense that there's an overseeing hand of providence on your life. I think Donald Trump has that same sense. He says he does. Why he would move his head like that suddenly when a bullet is about to shatter his skull, and to have it literally cut through his ear. That throb that he has, he says he comes back to him a lot, that pain. It's a reminder of how the hand of providence spared his life, not once but twice in the same several weeks. Washington knew he was protected. Later, an Indian chief said it seemed like the Great Spirit was watching over him. The other part of his personal history that I want to share with you is, and this is often overlooked, it's the insult to his pride. He strove to become a great man. He had a book of common manners, I think. That was what it was called, but it was a book of 100 things that he and his brother would read every night. Things that gentlemen do. You know, the gentlemen, how they walk into a room, how they talk, when they show their teeth, when they don't, how they greet women. And I want you to catch this, because as rugged as he was as a frontiersman out there in the wild, he carried himself with a stately kind of aristocratic elegance that, and I'm going to talk about the British snub in a second. I want to give you this. Washington was known as a graceful and skillful dancer. Not exactly the image you have of George Washington. Admired at balls and social gatherings. Women loved to dance with him because he was a very skillful, tall, 6'2", 2.5", tall, angular, muscular man, and perfect posture and a great dancer. Abigail Adams remarked this, and I grabbed this quote for you. He has a dignity and ease and politeness about him that leaves nothing to be desired, meaning there's a dignity and ease about him. He forged that personality, not by being in refined company, but by making himself refined. Think about that. He made it a goal. It helped him build alliances, helped him embody leadership. Now, I got 1 minute and 23 seconds to tell you the part that I really want to stress right now. He wanted to be a British officer. Remember, these were British colonies. But during the French and Indian War, after his courageous behavior, he sought a commission in the British Army. He said, listen, I've done exploits out here, and I'm experienced, and I'm qualified, and I've worked on myself, and I could do this job. But despite his service and his near miraculous survival at Monongahela, he was repeatedly denied a royal commission. British officials viewed colonial officers as inferiors and refused to grant him equal status. Washington never forgot the insult. His journals reflect the sting. And don't you know, that was in his crawl when he dressed up in a military uniform during the First Continental Congress, when he went down there and sat among them. And he basically advertised and said, I've got military experience. I'm the only guy here actually that's right now commissioned. And if you need a leader, I'll help. In other words, he wanted to prove to the arrogant British that rejected him that he was capable of being an officer. Well, they found out. All right, we'll be back in a moment.
Clean, safe water. It's the foundation of a healthy home, but hidden contaminants could be putting your family at risk. That's why there's Sentry H2O, the smarter way to protect what matters most. It filters out what doesn't belong and restores what your body needs. Pure, mineral-rich water that tastes as fresh as it is clean. Because your family deserves more than just clean. They deserve water that supports their health. Go to lancewallnau.com/water and use code LANCE to save 10% on your water wellness system. That's lancewallnau.com/water. Code LANCE.
All right, so Washington the dancer, Washington the man, the wilderness man, Washington the man supernaturally surviving smallpox, bullets, this sense of destiny, a complex personality, really, in the sense that he has great composure and command. And he had a certain philosophy of life. Let me give you some Washington quotes so you get to understand him. Discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable. It procures success to the weak and esteem to all. Napoleon, who was no slouch when it came to assessing military competency, said Washington is like a prince among generals because he took ragtag militia, volunteers, farmers, bookmakers, blacksmiths, and forged them with the help of the French and the Germans into a von Steuben, I think it was, and the Marquis de Lafayette. They helped him form that army. But discipline is the soul of an army, because discipline was the soul of him. If it is better to be alone, it's better to be alone than in bad company. He wasn't the guy that actually was going out of his way to hang out with people. As a matter of fact, one of his axioms for life, I have it in here somewhere. I'm afraid that if I bring it up, let's see. Oh, here we go. I'm going to give it to you. Ready? I found it. Watch this one. Be courteous to all, but intimate with few. This is his philosophy. And let those few be well tried before you give them your confidence. True friendship is a plant of slow growth that must undergo and withstand the shocks of adversity. This isn't the kind of guy you chum up to, right? And your best buds after a party. You know who was real close to him, though? Was Hamilton. Now, Hamilton didn't come from any great aristocratic background. I think he was even from Barbados himself. But he was brilliant. He was smart. And he was a good aide de camp. He was a good secretary for Washington. Washington learned to trust him. He passed the test, well tried. And he went on to being invited by Washington to be an important part of his cabinet. I'm reminded also of another situation, which I don't have a quote here for, but I'll tell it to you. Washington had enemies. I think it was General Gates. If I'm mistaken, we'll edit it out. But as I recall, it was a General Gates who was really jealous of Washington's commission. And Washington wasn't faring very well. He wasn't winning battles, by the way. His great success was in surviving all the way up to that innovation in the freezing cold winter at Valley Forge on Christmas Eve under snow and ice when he decided, let's go across the icy river and attack them at midnight. And so that they succeeded in surprising the Hessians in Trenton, New Jersey. And that was the psychological turning point of the war. But man, he wasn't doing well. So there was a lot of opportunism. People writing letters to Congress saying, would you get rid of this guy? We're losing. We can't afford it. Morale's very low. And Washington had to deal with this just like Lincoln had to deal with it. But Washington got one of those letters that was a backstabbing letter sent to Congress. And by accident, the courier delivered to Washington. Washington read the general, critiquing him, talking about him, realized it wasn't meant for him. It was meant for someone else. Folded it back up and wrote a note to the general. My apologies. It appears that this letter arrived at my desk by accident. It's been opened, but I'm sending it on. I'm sending it back to you that it might go to its appropriate destination. In other words, I didn't mean to read your mail. It arrived at my desk. Because sometimes that happens. Providence does that. But it reveals something about him. It wasn't like he didn't tear it up and, fire the guy or blast him or demote him. Something about this guy. Let us raise the standard to which the wise and honest can repair. The rest of the world is in the hands of God. The genius of Washington as a leader was that he was able to handle the power that was given to him without connecting himself selfishly to the power that was given to him, similar to Lincoln in this idea of actualized self, meaning he was able to subordinate his own ego and his own needs, including his financial needs. I probably should cover that. Lincoln, Churchill, Washington. It's amazing how many of these guys suffered, in a sense, from the stress of financial pressure. It's like the devil would try to hit them at every angle, but they never went down. He was able to deal with all the factions around him that were competing, and he stayed loyal to his mission and fair with other people. Be not hasty to believe flying reports to the disparagement of any. In other words, you hear rumors all the time. You hear talk all the time in the tavern. But he learned that a lot of times it's like tattletale, boasting, distortion, and be your own judge based on what people actually do, not what you hear. I want to talk about two moments that reveal the extraordinary character of Washington, because I don't want this just to be like a little trivia session. I want you to think about this. There are two moments that I believe really reveal something about the man. And it's the Newburgh Conspiracy, 1783. The men who had fought in the war had gone 4 or 5 years without being paid. That's tough. When you've given up everything you got and you're going to your wife and kids, and there's no mule because they had to sell it or something. And they were angry. They gave everything, and now the country's starting to get on. And so the soldiers, we were still a very young government at that time. There was no real sense of office. The president wasn't in position. The troops were, and Washington returned. He didn't want to go rule over America. He turned his sword in after he had won the Battle of Yorktown. He returned to go take after his estate, go back to his wife, his adopted children, because it was her children, and, the management of his affairs to try to get his financial house back in order. But while he's doing that, the military is ready to revolt. They're going to use their organization, and there are thousands of them with weapons. And they're steely, ready, strong. They've been hardened by combat, and they will take over the government, basically create a military junta, a dictatorship, like a South American junta. Well, Washington got informed about their gathering and their disposition because of their unpaid wages and pensions that were promised by Congress but not delivered. We've had those problems a long time. Washington called a meeting at Newburgh, New York, to address their frustrations because, frankly, they wanted him at the head of the army. You go in, you be the king, and you take over and take care of us. We're the ones that save this country anyway, you and us. Well, the officers were prepared to rebel against the civilian government. Washington entered at a moment when he was unannounced, and he went up and and addressed them. And they were still hardened and arms folded, and he knew he wasn't breaking through. And so he reached into his pocket to pull out a letter that was sent to him by one of the soldiers. He wanted to read it to them. And he looked a little bit confused because he tried to focus, and he looked up embarrassed, and he realized he can't read. He can't read in that light. So he said, "Excuse me." And the pride of the man, they all knew him to be a proud soldier. But he reached into his pocket and brought out his spectacles, and they never saw him in glasses, like Ben Franklin's spectacles. He put them on. They were made for him. And then he proceeded with all sincerity and an element of intelligent drama. He said, "Forgive me, gentlemen, but it appears that I've not only grown gray in your service, but now I find myself growing blind." And then he stumbled over trying to read the letter out loud. Well, many in the room, it says, wept when they saw the proud man that they had always carried himself with such an air of invincible military dignity, suddenly looking like an old man, trying to read with a light in front of them. And they saw his age, and it just broke them up. That moment broke the rebellion. My God, the hand of providence is so interesting. 1783, he shocked the world by surrendering his commission after he won back to Congress. In 1797, after 2 terms as president, everybody held their breath because he could have gone like Roosevelt, 3 terms. How about 4 terms? How about he's dying and, his next of kin becomes president like a royal Bourbon dynasty. King George III reportedly asked what Washington would do after the war. When told that he returned to his farming, the king said, if he does that, he's the greatest man in the world, I'll tell you that. That's what he did. He said, I'm done, guys. 2nd term, that's it. I did all I gave you, my last ounce of strength. I'm going home. And he did. Folks, I'm telling you, this kind of greatness is still in people. It's still in America. And Washington practiced that kind of, and I have a whole teaching I could do on his, his, show not yourself glad at the misfortune of another, even though he were your enemy. I could talk about his faith. It was a Quaker minister who ran into him at Valley Forge, a pacifist who wasn't involved with the war. But he gave Washington his lodge so that Washington could stay there with his officers. And he went out into the woods on his own land, and he noticed a horse there, and he was a little concerned if it was a British spy. And he kind of snuck up and looked, and it was Washington in the snow, on his knees praying. Now, he never espoused to be an evangelical, we know that, but his commitment to the providence, to the idea of God, to the necessity of faith, religion, was so formed on the inside of him that in his own solitude, like Lincoln, you don't see these guys doing it in public, but in private. He had a devotion and a sense of destiny and accountability and a kind of an internal compass that God put in him that I think helped to forge religious liberty as one of the values he championed for all faiths. Told the Jewish people, you guys are safe here in America. You're the seed of Abraham if you're good citizens. To the Catholics, he said, don't worry about the Protestants. They're not going to come after you. To the Protestants, he said, you're safe. He understood that America's religious freedoms were a part of what he had to establish for society to become a healthy Christian civilization. All right, that's my Washington component. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you again in the next episode.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends.